So the reason this recipe came about is because I'm always looking for ways to encourage more people to eat oysters who wouldn't necessarily eat them. This is very similar to a carbonara, but I've called it carmaroli, and the reason for that being that there were 3 Italian ladies that I'm friends with who are involved in the food world. They were having a conversation on Twitter about food, and they put a section of their names together to create this wonderful word. I had a little fiddle with it, and it became carmaroli, and I named it after them. Now, the reason that this recipe is used to encourage more people to eat oysters is because it's what I call a stealth oyster recipe. And it's because you wouldn't actually know there were oysters in it if you weren't told. And it uses some very simple ingredients. You've obviously got the oysters here and a bit of smoked bacon, the basil, fresh basil, and a bit of tagliatelle pasta, and lastly the rapeseed oil. And the reason for getting more people to eat oysters is because they're one of the most sustainable, ethical, and nutritious foods out there. So for this recipe, you probably want about 6 oysters minimum. And this is how you open them. It'll slide in at the hinge there and pop. And then you want to wipe your knife off, lift it up kind of to eye level so you can see the adductor muscle on the top shell. And you just slice that open there, removing the top shell completely. And then you can turn the oyster around slightly, remove the shell fragments, and then you slice the adductor muscle down again away from you, cleanly as possible to keep as much meat of the oyster as possible, and then gently turn it over to ensure it's detached. Chuck your oysters straight into a colander because you want to get rid of as much of the oyster liquor as possible. When you're cooking things like tempura oyster, this really helps as well because you don't want to be frying an oyster with lots of liquid in it. It doesn't help. So you can see that there's a lot of juice coming out of this oyster, and the longer you leave them in the colander, more juice comes out. You can actually use that for things like cocktails. Use them in a nice Bloody Mary that I do called a Shipwrecked Mary, and you can use them in dirty martinis as well, which is lovely. There we go. For this recipe, we're making an oyster emulsion, and you can actually use the oysters as they come. But what I like to do is trim the gills because this gives you a much cleaner and brighter creamy emulsion. As you can see, these gills are quite dark, so if you leave them in the mix, they'll darken the mixture, and when you do blend them up, it turns into a bit of a grey colour, which isn't as appetising. But those pieces aren't wasted. We use them in omelettes and stuff afterwards, but you're left with a really nice clean oyster, the pearly white colour, and none of the dark stuff. So now you've got your degilled and strained oysters, you just want to pop them into the food processor. And we're going to make a little emulsion. You slowly add your oil to the blend. Carmaroli, just like carbonara, uses nice streaky bacon because of the nice balance of fat and lean content, and you just want to cut it up into small pieces for the frying pan. So you just want to make sure the bacon's nice and crispy so that it's a good contrast to the oyster emulsion and the pasta. Once your bacon's nice and crisped up and your emulsification is made, all you need to do is pop some tagliatelle pasta into cook in boiling water. That'll take a few minutes. Okay, so this is when the dish comes together. We're going to be adding the cooked pastas directly to the really crispy bacon here with the nice oils and juices from the bacon. You stir that in, get the bacon spread out amongst the pasta. You're going to turn the heat off. We add the emulsified oysters straight into the mix. You can see that's really rich and beautiful. And you just coat the pasta and the bacon in that mixture. And you've got a dish very similar to a carbonara, but with no dairy. And then that just goes in to the mix. There we go. And top it off with
with a nice bit of fresh basil for decoration.